Just to take a step back, this was a foreseeable problem. We knew that in the setting of a pandemic, the first line of defense against a new viral contagion would be a therapeutic antibody, a monoclonal antibody like these drugs. These drugs have proved successful for other viruses, including Ebola. We also had one in development against MERS, another coronavirus that was never fully developed when that coronavirus largely disappeared. We didn't have the capacity, the excess capacity in this country to scale the production of these drugs. That's why we're dealing with the shortage that we have right now. Regeneron, in this case, took extraordinary steps to free up their U.S. facility. They effectively moved all the manufacture of all of their drugs out of their New York facility, which is an enormous facility, into a plant in Ireland to free up that entire New York facility. So they're using their entire plant in the United States to manufacture these drugs. It's still not enough. So it's an indication of where we lack the resiliency and the forward planning to try to prepare for a pandemic, which obviously is a subject of the book that I just wrote. But in terms of what the federal government's doing now, trying to administer these supplies on a more equitable basis and not effectively rationing it right now. I think what they want to do is get better control over the supply so that they don't oversupply certain parts of the country relative to others. Now, the bottom line is that the epidemic's declining very rapidly in the South, so I expect that demand is also going to plummet in the southern states that have been demanding the most of these drugs, and you're going to see the demand shift to other parts of the country.
Yep, wonder where those are going to be. We shall see. In your book, Dr. Gottlieb, you write about conversations you had with former President Trump last March. This was after you had stepped down as FDA commissioner. What did you advise him on?
Well, I talked to him on a range of issues. I had talked to the president when he made the decision to pull out of the World Health Organization and tried to encourage him not to do that, offered some alternatives that we could engage in to send our displeasure to the Chinese government without fully pulling out of the WHO. I had also talked to the president at the time that we were contemplating taking tougher action, the mitigation steps to try to slow the spread. This was back in early March. At the time that I talked to the president, I think that the White House staff had brought me in to try to make the case that we needed to take more stringent action at that point. The president was mostly sold on the steps that they eventually took. It was shortly after that meeting that the president signed on to an effort to step up what we were doing. That was the 15 days to slow the spread. But at the point at which I talked to him, he was mostly convinced, I think, that we needed to take tougher action. I spoke to him again on another occasion about a month later about some of the therapeutics that were in development, particularly hydroxychloroquine. And at that point, and this has been well reported already, the president wanted to authorize that drug, more access to that drug, and ultimately made a decision not to intervene to do that and left the decision ultimately to the FDA.
Dr. Gottlieb, we've gotten a lot more data on boosters in recent days. Are you concerned that the FDA and the administration are putting out, I don't know, confusing, sometimes conflicting messages on boosters?
Well, I think the meeting created a perception that there could be conflicting messages. I don't think that that's the case. The FDA at first voted on boosters for the entire age range, 16 and up, ultimately settled on a recommendation that boosters should be made available to people 65 and older and those who are at risk of a severe outcome from COVID, those who are at more risk from the disease itself. That seemed to be always where the FDA was heading. Administratively, they wanted to take a vote on the first question before they ultimately settled on the second question of administering it to a specific age cohort. And so I think it created a perception that the agency voted down boosters before they voted for it. That wasn't the case. It was more an administrative action, and I think that that's where it created some public confusion. CDC is now going to take up this recommendation. I would expect that they'll provide some more granularity around it, maybe expand the recommendation a little bit. That's ultimately what CDC has in their purview. They provide granular guidance to physicians and patients, and they interpret the recommendations that come out of the Food and Drug Administration. So, for example, they might say that they might enumerate the kinds of severe conditions that would qualify someone for a booster.